Welcome to Podcasting for Latina CEOs, the go-to podcast for passionpreneurs Latinas ready to launch and grow their online businesses and own their voice with podcasting. I'm Heidi de la Cruz, writer, two-time award-winning podcaster, and podcast launch coach on a mission to help you build a life of freedom, wealth, and impact by turning your ideas into income. If you're a Latina ready to break generational cycles and create your own table, this show is for you. Let's build our dreams juntas. Con amor, Coach Heidi. Welcome back to Podcasting for Latinas CEOs. I am your host and your coach, Heidi de la Cruz. And today I want to talk to you about the podcast cycle. All right, so what is the podcast cycle? And that is literally the process of creating, producing, and distributing or publishing a podcast episode. And the reason why I want to talk about the podcast cycle is this is one of the things that I go into detail when I have a live masterclass or a webinar when I talk all things podcasting. Because I like to give future clients and the attendees, I like to give them real expectations of what it is like to produce a podcast, because there is a lot of behind the scenes work. And we already know that the statistics of podcasters who don't make it past the 10th episode is really, really high. And one of the ways that I am trying to help lower that, right, with my podcast launch clients is letting them know, real talk, what is the behind the scenes work that it takes to produce a podcast. So then this way they can know if they have the capability or the bandwidth to add a podcast to their already busy schedule, right? Because podcasting is an online business within itself, which I'll get into more details in another episode, but it is a project that does take a lot of behind the scenes work. Okay, so today I'm going to talk in detail on what is a podcast cycle, what are the steps you need to take to create, to produce, and to publish an episode. And yeah, let's get started. All right, so first step in the podcast cycle is to research and gather your sources. So first thing you want to do is research the topic of your episode. Find sources that support your argument, your point of view, or your angle. Even if you're sharing your opinion, if you use sources to support your opinion, you have that backup, right? Once you find supporting evidence and sources, you list them and credit them in your show notes and your show description. By providing sources, your listeners can see the data-backed information you provide on your show. Now, did you know that as of 2023, podcasters are the most trusted media personalities? Among the United States, of course, right? So there was a research conducted by ACAST, and it was published in October 2023. And it says that podcasters are more trusted than YouTubers. And I wonder why. All right, the next step in the podcast cycle is to plan and outline your episode. So you should plan and outline your episodes to stay on track while you're recording. When recording a solo episode, you can quickly start talking about something else that comes to mind while you're talking about a topic. However, it is best to stay on topic. One of the biggest complaints I see online from podcast listeners is when a podcaster rambles on about things, especially in the beginning of the episode, things that are not relevant to the episode or the topic at hand. To help new podcasters organize and outline their episodes, I actually have a podcast starter kit available in my Stand store. The starter kit has an episode format outline to help you understand the flow of the episode. It has episode notes so you can brainstorm and write down ideas. It also has a show outline to help you write practical show notes for your listeners. So then that way you can use this episode outline as your show notes, and then you don't have to recreate the wheel every single time, right? Okay, the next step in the podcast cycle is to record. So once you have gathered your sources, you've done your research on your topic, and you've outlined your episode, now it's time to press record. If you're doing a solo episode, the sweet spot for recording should be between 20 to 32 minutes. This is because people are listening to podcasts while doing something else, usually commuting, and the average commute is about that long. If you're doing an interview episode, which you are interviewing a guest, those episodes should be about 45 minutes to an hour. Now, I will say, when I am recording solo episodes, I don't typically take a look at the clock and see how long I've been talking for. I focus on providing the value and the points that I want to get across. And so, for example, when I recorded my episode about social media, I was like, oh, it should only take like 30 minutes, right? Because I was going to go through every single platform that I've used and provide pros and cons for each, and then also share my personal experience. And when I finished recording, I was like, oh my God, how did I talk for 45 minutes? Like, it did not feel that long, but I realized that I had a lot to say, but I was still providing value to you guys. Like, I was still sharing about each platform. Like, I didn't go off topic is what I'm trying to say. So when you're beginning, yes, you want to stay between the 20 and 32 minutes. But if you go a little bit longer and you're providing value to your audience, that's perfectly fine. Do not beat yourself up about that, okay? All right, let's go to the next step of the podcast cycle, and that is to edit. Please, 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 pretty please, por favor, please edit your episodes. I know that there's podcasters out there that's like, well, I want my episode to be raw and honest, and that's why I don't edit. Okay, that's perfectly fine. You can have raw and authentic podcast episodes while they're still edited, okay? Because remember, people can watch bad video, but they will not listen to bad audio. Okay? Okay. Now, if you are not able to edit the episodes yourself, please outsource this step of the podcast cycle. Whether it's me, I don't know if y'all know, but I am an editor as well. Whether it's me, whether it's a VA, or you hire someone off Fiverr, just please make sure that the episodes are edited. Okay? Okay, thank you. Lastly, in my podcast course, The Voice Method, I do have 3 videos covering how to edit podcast episodes if you want to learn and are able to do this. Okay, and also I want to say in the beginning, it is going to take you longer to edit, but the more you do it, the faster you will get. So for example, in the very beginning, if your episode is about 15 minutes long or 20 minutes long, give yourself double that time to edit. So if your episode is 15 minutes, give yourself at least about 30 minutes to edit. Or if it's 20 minutes, give yourself about like 40 minutes to an hour. But the more you do, like anything else, the more repetition that you do and the more that you do the editing, the faster you'll get with it, okay? But again, you always have the option to outsource to me. Hello. All right, let's move on to the next step of the podcast cycle. It is to create graphics. So you have 2 options here. For each episode, you can use your podcast main cover art for each episode. You don't have to change that. Now you can create graphics for social media and things like that. However, if you want to change your graphic for each episode, whether that is adding quotes or adding the picture of your guest, you have those options. So this step in the process is actually optional. It's completely up to you, however you want to do it with your show. For the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants, I do add a picture of my guest to each episode. So I do have to create those graphics for each episode. And then I also have another graphic with the guest picture that also has a quote from the episode that the guest said. So I create multiple graphics for each episode for my first podcast. I also create the shorts, right? The video clips for YouTube shorts, for TikTok, and for Instagram Reels. Again, but this is completely optional. You can do this with what works for you. Okay. The next step in the podcast cycle is to write your show notes and show description if you're going to distribute it on YouTube. And like I mentioned earlier, you can definitely use your episode outline to help you write your show notes so you don't have to recreate it every single time. Okay, so after your show is recorded and edited, it is time to write your show notes and your show description. The show notes are a summary of the episode and where you list all the links and resources for your listeners that you mentioned in the episode. If you have a guest, this is where you will include their website, their social media links, and a small bio. The show description is just a name for YouTube video summaries, but essentially it's the same. All right, the next step in the podcast cycle is to schedule your episode. So next you'll log into your podcast hosting site, upload the audio file, the graphic for the episode, and add the show notes. You then have the option to schedule the episode as soon as needed or as far ahead as needed. So for example, if you are batch recording, let's say you batch record 4 episodes, that is content for a month, you can go ahead and schedule those 4 episodes a month in advance and just have them already set to go. So then when they release, then all you have to do is just market them, okay? The next step in the podcast cycle is to publish. So once the date comes that you set for the episode, your hosting site will automatically publish the episode. So you don't have to do this manually unless you publish on the same day you edit or something like that, but it can done automatically for you. So for example, for my first podcast, I release episodes every Tuesday at midnight. So I don't have to be awake at midnight to schedule my episode. I schedule it out in advance. Once midnight hit on that Tuesday, the episode is released to all the podcast listening sites. All right. So after that, the last step of the podcast cycle is to market your episode, right? Because people need to know that there's a new episode out. You can market your episode before publishing to begin anticipation for it. You can market afterwards as well, or you can do both. The choice is yours. I do both. So the day before the episode drops, I share the graphic with a quote from the guest and include the links to the podcast YouTube channel so new subscribers can join. After the episode is published, I market by sharing clips of the episode. And I also have a list of like 30 different ways that you can market your podcast that you can also get in my Stand store, just to give you different ideas of ways that you can market your podcast and your episodes. All right. That is the last step. After that, you repeat this whole cycle over and over again for each episode, all right? So now that your episode is published, you are marketing it, right? You are talking to your audience, you're letting them know a new episode is out, and you are building that anticipation. And even when the episode is out, you want more people to listen to it, right? And so then you start the process all over again for your next episode. There are a few tips and tricks that you can use to shorten this process, like batch recording, as I mentioned earlier. So once all the episodes are published, all you have to do is market. You can outsource any part of the process if you don't like to do it or you don't have the bandwidth to do it. Like I said, the editing, that's usually the main part of the podcast cycle that people like to outsource is the editing. Yeah, I can help you with that if you want to outsource that part of the podcast cycle. Or you can skip some steps and make it your own. Just make sure not to skip the most important steps. Like I said, editing. Okay. I've always said podcasting is not hard. There's just a lot of behind the scenes work. And that is why I am always honest with people who are interested in starting their own podcast, because I want them to succeed. I want them to have this podcast for years down the road. Okay. I don't want people to just start and quit before their 10th episode, like over 90% of podcasters do. People think that the podcast industry is oversaturated and there's so many podcasts out there. But the truth is, there's not a lot of active podcasts. Okay. There's a difference between starting a podcast and then just letting it go and actually continuing to podcast for years. When I tell people that I've been podcasting for 3 years, I think I've mentioned this before, they call me a veteran now, just 3 years in, because so many people give up so quickly when it comes to podcasting, especially when I tell them that, well, at least for this podcast, it's just me. I do the recording, the editing, the marketing For my first podcast, I do have help with the editing with my VA. But again, I got help with my VA this year. So for the first 3 years of my podcast, I was doing it all myself. So I know how to edit and market and things like that. So I am very honest. I do not gatekeep because I want people to be successful with podcasting. And podcasting is a long term game. To reach your podcasting goals, it takes time, just like everything. You're building one episode at a time, right? Your digital footprint, one episode at a time. Now, like I said, podcasting is a long term game. This isn't a quick get rich or become successful scheme. If that's what you're looking for, podcasting is not for you. I recently read on Threads that someone suggested publishing 100 episodes before you worry about analytics. So that's crazy, right? Because 100 episodes, especially if you're doing weekly episodes, I mean, think about it. There's 52 weeks in a year. So that's over a year before even worrying about analytics, right? Because you really do have to just get your reps in the beginning to feel comfortable with your show and feel comfortable talking about the topic and feel comfortable like telling people about your show, right? So that just lets you know what type of a long-term game we are playing here when it comes to podcasting. But I've had so much fun. Like I have fun recording these episodes, interviewing people for my first podcast, and I have so much fun coaching Latinas CEOs to launch their podcasts because I love taking them from idea and seeing the final product, which is a launched podcast. And then also just staying up to date with how things are going, checking in like, hey, how can I help you today? What questions do you have? Like, I absolutely love all of it. Podcasting, I will share in another episode the opportunities that podcasting has brought to me. And that is why I'm so passionate about this. I'm so passionate about sharing podcasting tips and about helping people and about not gatekeeping and sharing all the tips and the things that I've done because it is a lot of fun. Now, you can check out more blog posts about podcasting at my website, HeidiDeLaCruz.com. You can also sign up for my email list. I do provide the blog posts that I publish every Wednesday. I do provide it to my email list. And I also share more behind the scenes stuff in my email list. So if you, in addition to free coaching every week here on the podcast, you can get more free coaching at my newsletter. I will include the link in the show notes and the show description, okay? If you found this episode helpful with knowing more details of the podcast cycle and all the behind the scenes that it takes to publish an episode, please share it with a friend who has mentioned that they want to start a podcast. Please, please, please. This also helps people learn more that this podcast is out here to help those who want to start a podcast, okay? And lastly, if you want to sign up for the voice method, which is one-on-one coaching with me for 6 weeks, you can do so. And the links will be in the show notes and the show description. And lastly, there's also, like I mentioned earlier, the podcast course that is available. Also the voice method, which is helping you launch your podcast in 6 weeks or less. All right. Well, then there you go. I answered today. What is the podcast cycle? I went through all the steps. So if you have any further questions, please feel free to send me an email at Heidi, my name, Heidy, at HeidiDeLaCruz.com. And I will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Mommy Podcast.